In 1998, a series of chance finds scattered across this field near Manchester inspired a local enthusiast to start field walking. And for 8 years, he's been walking and walking and walking. Now, after hundreds of hours of close scrutiny, he's accumulated evidence of over 8,000 years of human activity, from the prehistoric to the post-medieval. But it's the Romans who seem to have been particularly active. There's loads of metalwork, including coins, brooches, and this gorgeous little snake bracelet. But the site itself remains an archaeological mystery. So what was going on here? Local archaeologists believe they've discovered a fortlet, but then not all the finds are military, and they cover over 250 years of the Roman occupation. So what were the Romans doing here in Warburton? We've got just 3 days to find out. Warburton's located near Manchester, between the River Bollin and the Mersey. The village can be traced back to the Anglo-Saxon period, and its parish church is dedicated to St Werburgh, the Anglo-Saxon saint from which Warburton takes its name. But over the past 8 years, the locals have been finding evidence which has pushed back Warburton's origins much further. That's a pretty impressive array you got there, James.
It is, isn't it? We've got stonework here from the prehistoric with the flint work. We've even got Bronze Age, a small axe there, which is really nice. But what's really excited me on this side is all the Roman material, the brooches and some of the coins and the various little bits and bobs.
What do you think it all means, Mike?
We've got quite a lot of material here from the Roman period, which is distinctively military, the brooches in particular, and these nice little rings. But we don't get, usually, in the northwest, this kind of concentration. If we're looking at military, I think we could be looking at something like a fort or a fortlet.
It does seem to me to be a bit of a leap of the imagination. From a few finds to an imperial fort with loads of soldiers hacking away at the poor Brits.
But we do have a bit more evidence. The local Archaeology Society have put in 1 or 2 trenches already in the field, and they've got what might be an enclosure, and in one of those trenches there's a ditch, a Punic-style ditch.
What's a Punic ditch?
It's a trap, a Roman military trap.
Francis, could this site be a trap for the enemy?
Well, I think we've got to be a bit, a bit sceptical, because I've seen steep-sided ditches on farms, and to my eye, that metalwork doesn't look military. I think it could be a farm. I think we've got to be very, very careful. Rectangular enclosure doesn't mean fortlet.
So we're putting in our first trench next to the previous excavation so that we can look at the form of this ditch and decide whether it really is Punic. And this will tell us for definite whether the site's military. David, what was the difference between a Punic ditch and any other kind of ditch?
It has a standard V-shaped inner slope, but the outer face is vertical or near vertical, which means that once you've got in there, it's extremely difficult to get out, and you become a sitting duck to the defenders to throw anything at you.
Why were they called Punic ditches? Does that mean they came from Carthage, as in the Punic Wars?
No, they didn't actually come from Carthage, but the point was that the Romans thought the Carthaginians were extremely treacherous, and these ditches were meant to be treacherous to anybody who attacked across them.
As the field walkers continue to march across the field, we still can't be sure whether our Romans were soldiers or farmers. But the finds are coming in thick and fast, and we're hoping they'll give us a clue.
Have we got much? There is a lot of this stuff that looks like brick, isn't there? I wonder if any of that's going to turn out to be the good Roman pottery.
It is, it's just bloody sand, isn't it? Yeah. Just sand, sand and more sand. It's like digging at Bournemouth, isn't it?
At our trench, it looks as though the Romans are about to make an appearance.
Mike, there's your ditch.
That looks promising, doesn't it?
So it does look as though that charcoal was coming out the other side, right on the edge of it.
I'll be happier when we got it sectioned.
Yeah, Francis, you put in a long jump pit.
Well, look at this.
Hey, have we got something?
Yeah, look at that. Well, careful, it took us all morning to find that.
Oh, wow. Rarely on day one have I ever seen such a cornucopia of finds. So what is this, Francis?
I'm told it's Romano-British. and it's probably Cheshire Plains ware or something like that.
Are they being serious, or are they winding
They
up?
are, they are.
So what shape would that pot have been, Francis?
Well, in a large storage jar about that high off the ground. OK, if we assume that is the fortlet ditch, we know which side of the fortlet it is, and we can make a pretty good guess by measuring at where the other 3 sides are. So that's what we're going to do. Suck it and see, measure it out, see if the ditch is there.
What, put more trenches in?
Yeah, yeah.
OK, well, while you do that, I better
careful.
fight these off to the British Museum. Geophys can't help us, but we do know that Roman fortlets were square, although we don't know exactly how big this one would have been. Using the locals' excavation report, we think our first trench has located the eastern edge, and we should be able to find the western side by digging directly opposite it. So Bridge begins to open trench 2 on the same alignment as Phil's trench. Francis and Matt are putting in a third trench to locate the southern side and find out the exact dimensions of the fortlet. The site's progressing nicely, and it looks as though we'll be able to fill in a real gap in the understanding of the Roman northwest.
There is actually quite a lot of activity going on here. There are quite a number of major centres which are either industrial or military centres. There's the major legionary fortress at Chester, for instance, on the Dee. And then moving across, we've got a fort and then an industrial site at Northwich. Another one at Middlewich producing a lot of salt during the Roman period. There's Wilderspool, which was a manufacturing centre, which is the nearest site to Warburton. And then we've got, of course, the fortress at Manchester.
We know the Mersey's a big trade network in the prehistoric period, in the Roman period. And we've got copper mining over at Alderley Edge, just a few miles away. And there could be a road network that links that into the Chester-Manchester-York road, and we could be part of that kind of localised industrial network.
Well, I think the key thing is to put a trench through or close by those 2 concentrations of metalwork on the downslope of the hill.
And also that'll give us a nice transect across the top of the ridge here.
It'll also give us some indication of the thickening of the plough soil as we go down the slope.
Well, if we're going to do that, why don't we pull the trench back over here?
What, right back here?
Yeah, right back to here, and extend the one from yesterday to meet it, well, just in case there are any stray archaeological features.
That will be the longest trench in time team history. We're going for the full half mile,
I
Phil.
think so. I'll get my man on the job.
Okie doke.
So we're hoping that a trench over the 2 concentrations of previous finds might unearth evidence of Roman occupation and explain how the metalwork got into the field in the first place. We want to learn as much as we can about the finds, so we've called in an archaeometallurgist to see if we can replicate one of them.
Well, it's a snake bracelet, or at least part of a snake bracelet. Of Roman date. I know it doesn't look like one because it's straight now, but it's obviously suffered quite a lot of damage during its life. And the snake head at this end is being broken.
I'm not sure that if I was going to have a bracelet made for me, I would want one in the shape of a snake.
Well, that's because we tend to think of snakes as frightening and sinister things, don't we? But in the classical world, they didn't. Before Christianity came on the scene, snakes seem to have been emblems of healing and of rebirth. You know, you see the snakes on chemist symbols twining around a star.
All the help they can get. Having dug this field to death, we're moving into pastures new and the next field along. And we're throwing everything at it. Archaeologists, field walkers, metal detectorists, even the dog. We think the new field is a good target since it's virgin territory. And more importantly, it also lies on the ridge of high ground, which Stuart believes is the most likely candidate for Roman activity. I feel as though I'm surrounded by low-key chaos.
Yes, that's because we're desperately trying to find out as much as we can about the whole field in a very short time. So we are doing a number of things. First of all, we're starting off with the old standby, which is geophysics. Yeah. But we're not really expecting it to produce anything because the results have been frankly terrible. And then we are metal detecting all the way across the field and labelling, tagging all our signals, which Henry's then plotting in with the GPS.
It means that we're using metal detectoring in the same way that we would normally use geophys in order to create a pattern on the ground, which we can then use as evidence about where we should put a trench in.
Yes, and then the third thing that we're doing with it is, because it was only ploughed this morning, we decided to go for the technique of shovel pitting, where we dig a small hole right in the middle of each 20-metre square across the field, and that recovers a certain amount of artefacts so that you can characterise what's going on in the topsoil from those artefacts, which we can then use in conjunction with the geophysics, if it produces anything, to locate a trench.
Time's of the essence since we've only got one day to explore the whole field. So everyone gets busy. Everyone, that is, except Phil, who's refusing to be dragged away from yesterday's trench. And Helen's still got loads of James's finds to double-check.
It's quite worn on that edge.
So that's fixed into the wood of the cart somehow, is it? In
I think it is. I mean, it's some way of distributing straps around the cart.
So a rain travels through that.
Yes, yes.
First century AD.
Yeah, I mean, the rain would have run through there because you've obviously got quite a lot of wear on this edge here. It's gone quite thin.
Okay.
And at our original field, Phil's tenacity has paid off. And yes, he's got a result from his trench. I've never been quite sure why we've explored quite this far out in the field.
Well, if you remember, there was metalwork that was coming off the crest. There were two concentrations, and Phil's trench was to come down the hill and follow that metalwork. Well, actually, it's been much better than that. We've found 2 lynchets.
What's a lynchet, Phil?
Well, it literally is an old field system. What you've got to imagine here, Tony, is literally a stairway of fields running parallel to the slope. And what is happening is that plough soil, as you plough along the slope, soil moves down the slope. And where Francis is, you will have a bank. And down here, you've got a cutaway terrace. You can see here that you've got a dark brown topsoil. That's this stuff, and it comes straight onto natural. Now, as we come down the slope, we've got 3 layers. We've got the dark topsoil, but in the middle, we've got this brown material, which is sloping down here, and at the bottom, we've got the natural. And this brown material is where the plough has actually sliced into the natural and moved all the soil down that way. So you'll have a bank here, and here there's a big cutaway. And so you've got a whole series of stairways. And you can see that the next cutaway terrace is up there where the chap is there. So you've got these fields that are about, what, 20, 30 metres wide, going down the hill.
Do we have a date for these lynchets?
Well, we've got scrappy pottery from the bottom of this lynchet that runs through the Roman 16th century and 18th and 19th century. So we might have 2,000 years of agriculture ploughing on this site.
But the important thing is that is exactly when the metal finds were being made. That is exactly the date of all those metal objects.
What's exactly the period? The medieval or the Roman?
Roman into medieval period.
This was a purely agricultural landscape, but we now understand the mechanism by which it formed.
And until we dug this trench down here, we had no indication that there was a pre-existing field system on this hill. The only field system that we could see was the present field system. This shows that there was a completely different landscape here in the Roman and probably medieval period.
Which is why it's not on the 18th century map, because these fields are totally different.
So finally, we're beginning to reveal the history of this landscape. The lynchets are evidence of an earlier terraced field system, possibly Roman. And this would explain how the finds got into the soil, as rubbish mixed in with the manure which fed the crops.
Well, Stuart, we're getting wildly overexcited about 2 lynchets out there. How do they fit into what we know about the landscape?
I mean, if you go back to the medieval period, what you've got is the medieval village of Warburton here in red. You've got a church down here and a priory, arable ground here, meadow around the edge, and park and manor centre up here, and the peat and mosslands over here. But you've got a strip of open ground, all suggesting that this strip where our fields located is the pasture for the animals of Warburton village and the parish.
So that's the pasture on which you'd have had the animals that would have manured the arable.
That's right. This is quite important in the understanding of this. Also, the pattern of movement actually is along that road that's there today, the road that we come along, leading from Dunham straight down to Warburton and then crossing over the river. The Mersey itself is an important boundary in the Saxon period between Mercia and Northumbria. And if there's Saxon occupation close to a major boundary, there's a very strong chance there might be even Roman occupation.
So those lynchets that we found are likely to predate the medieval pasture, you reckon?
Indeed, yeah, I mean, I would say that quite categorically from the evidence I can put together, yes.
So Phil begins to dig a trench in the new field over the biggest response to see whether there are any finds and to analyse how they got into the ground.
Is that in the spoil that's coming out, or is that in the... Could it be really, really small, or can't you?
Oh, it is very small, yeah.
It seems to be pretty localised, doesn't it? Is it in there, for example?
No. Let's try that for what I've got in my hand. No.
Try that. In there, then?
It's over in that corner somewhere. Must be very, very small, whatever it is. Lead.
Well, I'm damned.
It's a lead seal. You know the seals that you put on the bags? That's what I think it is.
There's quite a nice little pattern on there, isn't it?
Our prize find. Who needs Roman when you've got a seal from a 19th century seed bag? The field's now littered with trenches, and Helen takes a quick tour to see what's turning up.
No features?
No.
No. Anything good?
Well, the last bit that came up, courtesy of the detector, was that.
Oh, yeah.
It was the last bit we came out.
Yes, looks good on that side, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And not much on the other side, probably half a button. Never mind. OK, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
This whole field is dotted with tiny, discreet test pits, and suddenly we've got Phil's zonking great hole. What's that all about?
What we're hoping to prove is that there's a different pattern of finds in the top as opposed to that bit there.
There.
Yeah, then the subsoil, and then on the natural and in features underneath there.
And how are you getting on, Phil?
By and large, all the finds that we get, and they're mainly Victorian, post-medieval. The main thing is that we're recovering all the finds, not just being selective with metal. And certainly, once we get through the topsoil, which is where most of the finds are, once we get into the subsoil, we're not getting anything at all.
So what does all this tell us?
It's telling us quite a lot. I mean, it's telling us that this soil has to be manured. That's where most of these modern finds are finding their way in. And then it's also telling us that below that there's a rather different soil, which may represent pasture, and then possibly earlier fields are beneath that. But that earlier soil wasn't being heavily manured.
A bit frustrating for you, though, all this digging empty trenches.
I spend my entire life digging holes and finding nothing. I went with Ian, you know, the main digger driver here. He and I dug 1,800 metres across Salisbury Plain in 4 days. And what do we find? One post hole. Was I disappointed? No, of course I wasn't disappointed. The main thing is you solve the problem. We came here 3 days ago. We came here with a set of questions. We wanted to know about the forklift. We wanted to know about the metal objects in the plough soil. And I think over those 3 days, we've answered the specific targets.
I know what did really hack you off, though. The local pub didn't serve real ale.
Yes, you're right there.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
Bedford Purley Wood is in the Nene Valley in Cambridgeshire, about 15 miles from Peterborough. 1800 years ago, this was one of the wealthiest areas of Roman Britain, and our site would have been on the outskirts of Dura Breve, the main trading centre in the region. But while most Roman sites around here have been damaged by modern ploughing, it looks like whatever's hidden in these woods could be really well preserved. Our challenge is simple enough. What were the Romans doing here? But thanks to the trees, finding out isn't going to be that easy. The other problem is this is a national nature reserve and there's lots of protected plants here. John, you having a good day?
Wonderful.
For once, though, we don't have to wait for geophys, because in some places we can actually see Roman walls on the surface.
Look, this is silly. You can't have archaeology just... It's sticking above the ground. It's not under the ground.
No doubt, this is why the site was first discovered by an antiquarian back in the early 1800s. And it's because the remains are close to the surface that they've also shown up so well on this LiDAR picture. The colours, by the way, represent height, with green marking the low ground and white the highest. Phil, are you sure we're digging in the right place?
What do you mean we're digging in the right place?
Well, look at that. Lovely and neat. Look at that. Chaos.
I don't actually regard that as extremely chaotic. Come and have a look.
Sorry, there's a rather large archaeologist in my eye line.
Look, we've got a nice, long, straight row here. It's all built of stone. And look, we've even got one stone on top of another stone. Now then, what would you call that?
It's a wall.
Thank you.
I eat my words.
That's right.
What do you reckon we've got here?
Well, you see, this is the problem. You've got that plan which shows a series of earthworks.
Yeah.
It is very, very easy to assume that all the upstanding bits are walls. Now, when they dug here a little earlier on, they know for a fact that sometimes where there are earthworks, there weren't walls. Sometimes there were walls and there weren't earthworks. It is not as clear-cut as that drawing suggests. We don't also know whether or not it's the same phase.
So there was some sense in my point. Just looking at this tumble doesn't necessarily mean that you can interpret where the buildings are.
That is not your question. Your question was, are we digging in the right place? Yes, we're digging in the right place.
All right, I was wrong.
Well, I'd say it's a floor tile.
That looks like Roman floor tile, doesn't
Roman floor tile, yeah.
Yep,
Promising.
Good. Very good.
So Matt's wall is Roman. And I have to say, it does look suspiciously like it belongs to the same range of structures that Phil's digging some 80 metres away. There's still lots of rubble to remove, but already Phil's discovered the walls survive to some depth, and in places are built with fragments of stone and tile, creating a herringbone pattern.
At the bottom, you can see the...
80 metres away in our second trench, Matt's finding that the walls he's unearthed are built in exactly the same way.
There's quite a few bits of floor tile out of there.
Oh, right.
But I think these were actually built into the wall and formed a part of the structure.
Right, because you get layers of tile in Roman walls. So
Yeah.
That rather suggests it is a building, I think. Yeah.
And there's been a few bits of pottery as well.
Oh, that's good, because there's very little from elsewhere. So what have you got? The local wares?
Yeah, that's Roman Nene Valley.
Yeah.
That's
rather good.
And we've also had a bit of iron ore as well.
Ah, no, that's good, because we've got a metallurgist coming tomorrow, so
Right.
you can have a look at that.
Yeah.
I'm in two minds, actually. It looks as if it could be a standard Roman villa, but the plan is suspicious, and I suspect the linking with ironworking is very intriguing.
John's persisted in his search for evidence of metalworking. He's been using the MagSus. That's a magnetic susceptibility machine to you and me. And he now reckons he's getting very strong signals over here on the western edge of the site. I've agreed to meet Mick out there, and I shouldn't get lost if I just follow the signs. 2 men and 2 signs.
Oh, yeah, don't take a note of the signs. I wanted you to see this test pit here.
A couple of years ago, we had a little test pit here. It's been fertiled around by animals now, but you can see there's a bit of walling here. But very importantly, this produced a couple of bits of slag.
It doesn't look much, but slag is a byproduct of making iron, and it could mean we've got a Roman iron smelting furnace nearby.
There's a big enclosure around here. I mean, it's probably too big for a building, Ben, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, unless it's a very big old barn or something like that. It's certainly very large.
Yeah.
John, have you managed to cover most of this?
Well, we've done half the survey so far, and what's really interesting, here, to just show you the results. Look, the test pit is down here, and that's where you've got a bit of walling. But I'm getting really strong readings here in red, and I've done half the survey so far, and I'm sure that this is the concentration of the area of burning. And just look at the soil. Look here, it's really grey. Whereas in here, in amongst the trees, look, it's in silly, see the red clay. This is the concentration of the burning.
But professional to the end, John wants to finish the survey before we start digging.
And I'm confident this isn't barbed wire fence.
Good. Because there are also an awful lot of pits showing up on our LiDAR picture, and quarry pits can be classic signs of Roman ironworking. So maybe we haven't got a villa here, but a specialist industrial site. So to help us find out, we've invited an expert in Roman metalworking to join us, and he's going to start by looking at one of the pits that seems to have a spoil heap around it.
If you look at this, and the orangey colour tells us there's a little bit of iron in there, but not enough to be worth smelting.
Right.
This is some stuff we found down the road, just in a cutting, and you can feel the difference in weight. Look at the colours.
I mean, I could spot that as iron straight away.
Exactly.
It's very different to that, isn't it?
This will occur in bands underneath this and stuff, so you've got to get this overburden off.
You've got to get through this potentially to get like that, have you?
Exactly,
right.
yeah.
With so many pits to check, it looks like Roger will have his work cut out. But what I find most surprising is that we could have so much industry close to what we suspect is a villa. Interestingly, we're getting evidence that people lived and cooked in the buildings Phil's investigating.
Cracking. Absolutely cracking.
This mortarium would have been used for grinding food like corn or maize to make bread, and it suggests that we could be close to a kitchen. In fact, we do seem to be getting the sort of finds you'd associate with a Roman villa. The problem is we're not finding very many of them.
Everything we'd expect to find on a villa site is here, both in terms of sort of range of material and dates, but in really small quantities.
What do you reckon's going on, Stephen?
The other way to look at it is to ask the question, what are they doing with their rubbish in the first place? I mean, if, for example, we've got evidence of ironworking here, could they be digging pits to extract the ore and then chucking their rubbish down the pits to get rid of it? And that would be a very simple explanation about why there isn't much material on the site, full stop.
Which is another reason to start digging those pits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, and this is typical, just as I point out the shortage of finds, news reaches me that Matt's trench is starting to look really exciting. He's finding huge quantities of stuff, and it's all much posher than we've seen anywhere else.
Hypercourse heating flue tile, look, with the marks on it where the plaster sticks on. You've also got lots of roofing material. These are the clay tiles off the roof, one like that, and then a curved one over like that. So, you know, it's all looking much more like a sort of high-status building than we thought.
Is that painted plaster?
Yeah, you've actually got stuff with patterns on it, look, and red patches, and there's even more coming out where Matt is. You've got more of it there, haven't you?
There's actually a piece there in the top of this rubble layer with a black painted line across the top.
You've got the trench of the day, without any doubt, haven't you?
It's coming up with the goods, isn't it?
We could be thinking about we've got industrial activity here. You know, it's either some furnace or some oven or something like that, a kiln or something.
That's why we put the trench here. We wanted to know what was going on the inside of the building, and you've nailed it. You've got something that's giving us activity inside the building.
What on earth is that then, Anthony?
I have no idea. I've been trying to unravel it for that.
Yeah, I mean,
You got something, guys?
Well, we've got a nice piece of what appears to be possibly a bit of carved stone.
This?
Well, yeah, but what you can't see, Tony, is that round here,
Yeah.
it does look like an arm. It really does.
I wouldn't mind. If it's Roman and it's carved stone, that would be a big one for us, wouldn't it?
Yep.
You were the one who was saying, oh, it's very rare to find things like this.
It is very rare, but we have our occasional moments.
Of what he's uncovered here. Meanwhile, carefully placed in between the ant's nest and the deadly nightshade bushes, Matt's trench is revealing the first glimpse of some sort of posh structure.
You can see the mortar there.
Yeah, coming up, yeah.
Yeah, look, there's the edge of another one there.
Excellent, yeah, well, that could be a lead into a flue or something.
So this would have formed some kind of floor heating or something like that?
Yeah, if it's a hypercourse, yeah, there's sort of pili within the room itself. It begins to look ever more structural.
The new theory is that this bathhouse is not part of a Roman villa, but built for a manager or overseer who was looking after the ironworks here.
Is it possible that we're looking at some overseer here who's working on behalf of the state?
Right.
And the state, of course, I think, have a very, very large presence in the building underneath Caster Village.
Oh, yes, yes.
And it could be some procurator there who is not only superintending Fenland estates, but ironworking estates as well.
Yeah.
And how far is Castor?
Castor's fantastic, because it's only a few miles away that way.
And this was also excavated by our antiquarian?
Artist spent many years excavating at Castor, where he found enormous building complexes underneath the modern village.
It's a good idea. Our site, controlled from Castor, could have been one of several iron production centres situated on the outskirts of Dura-Brive, the main trading centre in the region. Ermine Street, the M1 of its day, literally ran through the town, and with the River Nene close by, iron could have been dispatched by road or river to almost anywhere in Roman Britain. And if this bathhouse was for an overseer, it looks like he lived in fine style, judging by these chunks of painted plaster that show the colour scheme of the walls of this building 1600 years ago. It's a stark contrast to Phil's Trench, where there's no sign of painted plaster or luxuries like underfloor heating. But we did find what looked like a carved stone here yesterday. And now that our experts have had time to carefully examine it, I'm curious to know what they think it is.
It's a stone.
A stone?
A stone.
But not just any random stone. Phil thinks it's been definitely shaped for some purpose or other.
Take a look at this one here. Now, that was found just outside in the angle of the walls there.
Yeah.
Look how that ordinary stone has been used as a whetstone to sharpen tools. And it just goes to show that every stone you find on a site like this, you have to look at it, think about it, to make sure it's not an artefact.
Thanks, I think that's a very good lesson to learn from someone who was sure that was a statue last night.
It looked very good at the time.
But at least Phil's Trench and Faye's Trench put in here have given us lots of useful detail about the actual buildings in this range. This is a reconstruction of the area where Phil was digging, which we now know was a series of rooms based around a courtyard. We think these were workshops or living accommodation for the people who worked here, a workforce probably of slaves, which would explain why we didn't find any coins or items of real value here. The question now is, have we discovered the main iron smelting area up here on the slightly higher ground?
Sorry, I'm on the wall now.
Good, so you're on the wall, yeah, and I'm inside.
But I'm still over the floor of another room.
Possibly.
So you've actually got a wall running with... That still means that could be a door jam, and that looks like the corner of where there was a door. Ah.
So, there's a room there, and there's a room there.
But no wall.
Wall has gone, robbed away.
A lot more work's needed here, but we can get some idea of the extent of the bathhouse from the size of this earthwork. And if our theory is right about the link with Castor, then it's possible that our bathhouse was laid out like the one shown here in Artis's picture, which means we're talking about a building that would have looked something like this. It was probably a standalone facility used by the official overseer on what would have been a state-controlled iron working site. Our dig's certainly given me a newfound respect for this man, Edmund Artis, who was clearly a very good archaeologist for his time, but died before he could publish his written reports. His map of the Archaeology, drawn in 1828, has proved to be largely accurate, and it's not just the buildings, but also the pits he recorded that are key to understanding this site.
Goodness me, it's a journey to the centre of the earth.
What we now know is that in Roman times, a lot of the rubbish was being thrown in these pits.
So basically, this pit was open at the same time that those buildings were being occupied and used. And this looks a bit clayey to me. So is that what they're going for, the clay? Yeah, there's no sign of ironstone or any bands of ironstone in this at all. So it must be clay for some purpose. And the little sort of pock marks and things I can see in there, is this sort of root activity? Well, some of it is, but some of these dark patches, if you carefully clean them back, you can actually see adze marks or pick marks where they've actually levered the clay out from this pit.
Fantastic. We now know not all these pits were dug for iron ore. Many, like this one, would have been dug for clay to build and repair the iron smelting furnaces. So at the end of 3 days, we can now picture this long-lost Roman settlement as it must have looked in its heyday around 200 AD. What's been hidden in these woods is a massive ironworking site, with the furnaces and ore roasting pits on the slightly higher ground, while the mining was going on here, chasing the seam of natural iron ore. The workshops and living quarters were not far away and were very much second class, as mentioned by Edmund Artis. But there was at least one fancy Roman building, a bathhouse, situated well away from the industry here on the eastern side of the site.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
Time Team get invited to all sorts of places these days, but they don't come any grander than this. This is Drumlanrig Castle near Dumfries in Scotland. But that's not for us. Typical Time Team, what we're interested in is something that's been discovered round the back in the garden. There's not much to see on the ground here, apart from a few lumps and bumps. But look, this photo was taken from the air during a particularly dry summer, and you see all these strange shapes and lines. The experts reckon these could be the remains of a Roman fort. If it is, it could have a really good story to tell, because it would have been in the front line of the Roman attempts to invade Scotland. Time Team have got just 3 days to solve this Roman mystery, in what must be one of the largest back gardens in Scotland. Most Roman forts in Scotland were built of turf and timber and looked something like this, with big defensive ramparts and ditches, a gateway on each side, and buildings laid out to a set plan. In theory, Roman forts were meant to be the same, but they very rarely are. It's going to be a 10-metre long trench, and the first ever to be put in on this site. Trench 2, meanwhile, is going to test this geophys signal in what's thought to be the interior of the fort. Hopefully, it's going to give us our first look at one of the buildings inside. It's 11:20 and everyone's very excited, except me. I think probably the main reason I feel so sceptical is the one thing I know about Roman sites is that you get loads of pottery. But here, the only pottery anyone's ever stumbled on is one piece, this. Richard, where did you find it?
I found it just behind us here, Tony, in the Children's Adventure Playground.
Did you realise that it was Roman?
No, I didn't realise at all. We actually thought it was an old gardener's pot.
But you've got excited about it enough to want us to come here?
Well, certainly the site behind us, it was discovered in 1984 through aerial survey, and that's really all we know. You know, Roman camp, piece of pot, that's the story.
This Roman pot dates to the 2nd century AD, and it's our first clue to when this fort was occupied. But apparently our experts think it's likely that there was an earlier fort here as well, one that dates to the Romans' first attempt to conquer Scotland in the 1st century.
40 years after the Romans invaded in 43, the governor Agricola, in the early 80s AD, is bringing the Roman army right up into what we call Scotland, garrisoning it as he went and building roads.
It sounds like it's going to be tricky to sort out, especially looking at the size of what I was calling Trench 2. Mick's strategy for the interior of the fort is to dig test pits. But you're not going to learn much from a trench as tiny as that, are you?
All we're going to learn is what sort of deposits are in there and handfuls of pottery that give us some sort of date from it.
Why here, John?
Well, look, we've got the geophysics. There's the main road coming through. You can see it on our plot, and the streets going off to the side. There's actually a road going across here. The main road there.
So it's like that, isn't it?
So we're in the corner, and there should be a sort of building, maybe a barrack block.
Well, there ain't much of a barrack block there yet.
Well, not yet.
Just rubble.
No, but if it was a timber building, it'd probably sit on rubble like that anyway, wouldn't it?
Has it given you any clues so far?
We got 1 or 2 bits of pot.
Pot?
This one here, look.
Well, that's doubled the amount of Roman pot they've had so far. Is this the same sort of age as Richard's piece?
Yeah, it's 2nd century stuff, so it's probably towards the end of the life of the fort. So there must be earlier stuff underneath.
So you're going to keep going down here?
Yeah, I mean, we're drawing it and recording it now, and then we'll go down and see what happens.
Yeah. We've opened up another test pit over this geophys signal that could be the remains of a corner tower. Already it's turned up some pottery that again tells us something about life here in the 2nd century AD.
So we have some properly Roman pottery, little jar rim, but this is coarse
Iron Age style pottery, but it's not earlier than this material, it's contemporary with it. It looks as if, for their very coarsest, cheapest pottery, they're buying the ordinary pottery they can find in the locality.
Buying it from the locals who are living around, presumably.
Yeah.
So would the local people have been coming into a fort like this and flogging them stuff, or would they all have been the enemy?
They'd certainly be coming in because, of course, by the mid-2nd century, the frontier's moved north. It's on the Antonine Wall between Glasgow and Edinburgh. So this is within the Roman province. So the people here are beginning to go through the process of becoming part of a Romanised province. And there, all kinds of supply and interaction is going to start taking place, yeah.
Although I'm not keen on tiny trenches, this one, Trench 2, where I was helping yesterday, seems to have paid off and revealed traces of a wooden building.
Matt, I believe you're the only one with finds trays that are filling up.
Yeah, absolutely.
What have you got?
Well, we've come down in this trench onto this burnt layer, which looks like the destroyed building, and...
Well, hang on, do you mean destroyed or demolished?
Ah, well, there's the key question. I think it could well be demolished, because quite often these forts were razed to the ground by the soldiers as they left.
That's exactly right, they cleared the whole place.
And we're getting things such as the daub there from the walls, burnt clay.
Right.
And we even have some of these carbonised wattles.
Yep. So that's the wood framing in which the clay was packed around.
Yeah.
So it looks like they've knocked that down and then set fire to what was left over of it.
Yep.
Yep.
There are a few of these nails here, these large ones, and I presume they would have been holding the actual building frame together.
And probably made in the fort itself, in the workshop.
Right.
Almost certainly, yeah.
This little bit of metal.
Oh, yes.
I couldn't work out with the end of a metal strap or something, but it didn't fit with the nails, and
Well, there's an edge there. Do you see the corner there? Right, but it's covered in corrosion. It's just possible that it's a piece of scale armour, which is the sort of thing you might associate with auxiliary troops, but, you know, it's very, very difficult to say.
All our evidence so far is building up a picture of the fort in the 2nd century AD. We've got a wooden building with wattle and daub walls, which, due to its position, we think may have been barracks. We're also digging up the remains of what's thought to be a much fancier building made of stone. Richard, apparently one of the really exciting consequences of you inviting us here is that we found the Principia right here. Although that's all I can tell you, because I've no idea what a Principia is.
It's the headquarters building, the main administrative centre of the fort, a very elaborate structure. And one of the big surprises we've had is that it seems to be built of stone. Now, that's something we weren't expecting. This looks like it's the Antonine, or the mid-2nd century, around 140 to 160 building. Have a look at this.
At the moment, it just looks like rubble to me, but then Guy was expecting me to say that.
We're in the courtyard. See this group of people here?
Yeah.
That's roughly where we are. we're in the middle of a courtyard. What we've just seen where Kerry's digging over there...
So where's that?
...is this front wall here.
Yeah.
So, just follow me.
Yeah.
If I run up here...
Come on, Richard.
Right, I'm now standing roughly at the entrance to that big hall, OK? So stay where you are. I'm now running round the hall, which is a little bit like a small parish church, up to here.
Yeah.
Round to the back. This is where the shrine is, where the unit standards and valuables are stored.
Yeah.
All the money, all the gold and silver possessions that some of the officers might have had.
Yeah.
Right the way up here, down to the end of the hall, passing rooms that may have contained all the paperwork that recorded the unit, and it's where the soldiers have been stationed, where they had to go, all their duties, that kind of thing. The end of the hall here. Now I'm moving out into the courtyard, so this is the big courtyard area where the commandant might speak to the officers of the unit, call in troops for disciplining or religious services. They had a whole religious calendar they had to follow, dedications to the emperor and everything. Come back to here, OK, and this is the front gate into the headquarters building, and I'm looking out through that, up through the road that leads through the north gate of the fort.
Meanwhile, there's no way anyone would confuse this with one of our test pits. It's our 10-metre-long trench across the fort's defences. The news here is that Phil reckons he's found a couple of post holes.
What do you think about that? Second post hole to one I had yesterday. Look, there it is. There's the one I've got now. And look, whacking
massive,
great
isn't
post
it?
hole there.
Yeah.
Phil's impressed by the sheer scale of the fortifications, but also intrigued to hear Guy's theory that they were probably never attacked.
The Romans wanted to fight a particular type of war with their defences, and they liked set-piece battles. But up here in Scotland, you've got various different tribes like the Votadini, the Selgovae, the Novantine. They don't want to fight that kind of war at all. They've got a much more
a much looser idea of fighting, and they're not really stupid enough most of the time to come and attack this sort of place. They want to wait out there by drawing the Romans out into the forests and marshes when they're out foraging for food or supplies or on the march, and operate a guerrilla warfare. So the fort will have looked great and be very impressive.
But it's no use at all.
Well, because the tribesmen weren't stupid enough to come up and attack this.
I suppose it's a good way to spend your labour while you're up here, isn't it, really? Just build a fort, chaps.
There's nothing worse than a bored soldier or a bored archaeologist, so back to
I want to carry on, yeah.
Yesterday we put in this trench to find the back wall of the 2nd century headquarters building, which isn't clear to see on the geophys plot. The news today is that it hasn't hit the building, but it has turned up lots of Roman finds. And is this what I think it is? Could that be a hobnail?
Yes, it's got the big conical head and the curved over tail to it.
I told you I wanted to see evidence of one particular soldier, Mick. At last we've got it. The finds are all coming from what seems to be a Roman midden or rubbish dump that was sealed under this cobbly layer. Both seem to date to the 2nd century occupation of the fort.
So there's actually quite a lot of archaeology in this trench.
But we still want to see more of the headquarters building. Phil? So Phil's opened up another trench. Do you reckon that you're down on top of the headquarters?
How the hell should I know that, Tony? I've only just opened the trench, we've only just cleaned it up.
All right, well, can I ask you a different way? Why did you put in your trench here and not in the forest?
That is a totally different question. Working from the principle of the known to the unknown, we appear to definitely have the headquarters building there. Yeah. We think we've probably got the corner of it in here.
It's quite patchy, this earth, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this looks like the same destruction stuff we've had elsewhere of sort of charcoal and daub, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is massive burning, really big, heavy burning. But you know, like I say, we've only just opened the trench,
Yeah.
Mick.
You're telling us to go away, aren't you, and leave you to get on with it?
I'm trying to be polite.
Yeah, I can see that.
It didn't work. See you. Now that Phil's working here on the headquarters building, Bridget's in charge of finishing our dig across the fort's defences.
And 8, 9. It's about 9 metres.
Isn't it? Yes.
She's trying to make sense of what's left of the 9-metre wide rampart.
Well, the problem with all these turf ramparts is, of course, none of them survive because they're fundamentally unstable. They rot and fall away. So all you've got left is what the Romans chose to leave behind. Now,
these fragments of burnt wood are intriguing, and Guy reckons they were used to strengthen the rampart.
So they use a series of timbers to frame it and hold it together as it tapers up to the walkway. So all you've got left are the bottom layers and perhaps some of the timbers, which is what those might be, that were used to lace the rampart to frame it. Right, Phil, where's your floor?
That one there.
Meanwhile, back in the trenches, we've opened up a few more test pits to help us work out the layout of the huge headquarters building that stretches across here.
Phil, 6 centimetres different, so same floor again.
Oh, that's very good.
And the midden, or rubbish pit we discovered here, has got even more interesting. Not only has it produced lots more finds, such as Roman glass, but underneath it we've now revealed an earlier structure.
What these look like, to me, is timbers, or the positions of timbers that have rotted away.
That's exactly right.
Is that what you'd think these were?
These are earth-fast timbers, framed together, pegged and jointed together, supporting a superstructure but firmly bedded in the ground, floorboards over the top.
Right. So we're looking at an earlier phase of Roman timber buildings, barrack blocks or whatever they are.
Yes, it is. It certainly predates the metal surface that we're on.
Yeah.
But the pottery that came out of it was all 2nd century, so it's part of the second major phase of the site.
So there could still be an earlier phase of fort underneath?
Absolutely, yes.
So even though we've found 2 different layers inside the fort, they both seem to relate to the 2nd century occupation of the site. We're talking about a period of something like 20 years, long enough for turf and timber structures to need repairing or replacing as needs changed. And in the absence of any dating evidence in the bottom of this 3-metre defensive ditch, the feeling is that the 2 phases of ramparts we've unearthed both probably date to the 2nd century too. It looks like any evidence of a 1st century fort, if it's here, will be buried too deep for us to find. Yesterday, you were the one who said you wanted to work outside the fort to see if you could find any evidence of anything really early. How have you done?
Well, the thing that I was really excited about was this little ditch here, forms like a triangle. There's the fort, and it seemed to sit on the outside of it. And what I was really interested to know was whether it came on, is it part of an annex coming along here or whatever. So we asked the geophysics to do this area down here.
Geophys have surveyed this area, but they can't find any continuation of the ditch, leaving Stuart to conclude that the annex could be shaped like this. But what's an annex for?
We don't know a huge amount about annexes. We think that they could have been there and they could have held things like animals that might have been related to the fort, or possibly industrial activity that they didn't want to take place inside the fort.
Late 1st century.
Gordon reckons this shape could be really significant. He thinks it's identical to an annex found at a fort at Stracathco.
Snap. There you are. That's the crop mark at Stracathro. This is the crop mark at Drumlanrig. The little triangular area and the continuation that Stuart was talking about is the equivalent of, shall we say, that area there. Here is the annex, just the same shape, although 4 times bigger than Drumlanrig, and here is the corner of the fort on its side to which it's attached at Stracathro. Exact parallel.
Stracathco is classified as a definite 1st century site, and Gordon now thinks that this could be proof of the same early occupation at Drumlanrig.
Is what you're saying that the best evidence for 1st century activity is this annex?
That's
is that
right.
what you're saying?
In terms of structure, yes, at the moment.
So you found something really good and you didn't even know.
That's why I was so excited.
Geophys' completed survey has revealed lots more buried archaeology for the experts to think about, and it can now be studied against our 3D model of the site. But most importantly, what the Geophys plot has given us is a much clearer idea about the layout of the 2nd century fort.
We can put on the ramparts and the ditches. Now we know about those, obviously, Phil's dug the trench right the way through it, so we've got a pretty good idea of that. Now we've got the headquarters building, which Kerry and the others have been opening the trenches up across, so we know that building's there, and it's pretty clear from the geophysics. Now that's the nodal point, if you like, and from this everything else pans off. So we can put in the other buildings according to the geophysics.
That's very good, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can really see those in the geophysics.
So there's the barracks, probably for the infantry. There's our headquarters building. I put granaries here and our commandant's house, but to be honest, we really can't be certain about exactly where those were on this fort. More barracks here, perhaps for a cavalry contingent, if there was one here. We end up, therefore, with roughly 480 infantry and possibly 120 cavalry at the end. Standard Roman unit.
Guy may be right, because it looks like there were definitely some cavalry here.
So if one of the trenches behind you...
This is really exciting. This is so Roman Imperial cavalry.
Really?
Yeah. It can only work in a limited number of places on the harness. As you can see, the main harnessing on the saddle itself, which stops the saddle from either moving forwards or backwards, has these fittings.
Right.
So it's more likely to be perhaps here, or on a brow band, somewhere where it's going to be more or less permanently in place. Line of them polished up, they'd look fantastic, as all of this harness does.
But for a Roman site, we've had relatively few finds.
I really expected there to be bucket loads of stuff.
Well, there are bucket loads of finds around here. They're just not on the fort because the Roman army did its housework when it packed up. It didn't leave the stuff around for the enemy or for anybody else. It cleared away the fort. And all the archaeology we produced just suggests that this is a very complicated site with a lot of occupation, with several occupation layers in a very tight date range, but neatly cleared away every time.
And in most cases, we haven't gone into those layers of archaeology. We've just come down onto the top of them.
Which is precisely what we've done on our 2nd century headquarters building in several trenches. Finally, what can we say about it?
We didn't know whether this was a dividing wall or the back wall of the main building.
This is of the headquarters building?
The headquarters,
Right,
yeah.
right.
There might have been a room coming this way.
Right.
So we put this trench in.
Yeah.
And all we've got is this road surface. That's all we could see on the geophysics.
But there might be something in this gap, mightn't there?
There might be something, but come and look at Phil's trench.
I've cracked it. I tell you. We've actually got all the components in here. We've got the main road and it actually stops here. And the reason it stops is that it's butting up against the back of the main wall.
It's difficult to see because the stone walls have been robbed away, but as I understand it, Phil's located the massive back wall of the building, and inside it, evidence of a room with a wooden partition wall and the trace of what might be a dais or raised floor. It's likely that this was the Chapel of the Standards, the room at the heart of the headquarters where they kept items such as a bronze Draco and the other valuables. And as we found lots of evidence of burning within this huge building, it seems likely that the Roman soldiers set fire to the headquarters just as they did to the wooden buildings. before leaving Western Scotland for the last time and withdrawing to Hadrian's Wall around 160 AD.
We've got it, we cracked it.
And all the result of the geophys.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.